It's been a while since I released my video, A Complete Timeline of the Golden Idol Universe, which is no longer complete. I've scripted part of an updated video that covers the DLCs for Rise of the Golden Idol, but I'm going to wait until all 4 of this year's DLCs are released, since I suspect they will change my timeline significantly. In the meantime, I still can't stop thinking about Golden Idol, so I decided to make shorter videos about things like themes and characters. This video will be an analysis of Edmund Cloudsley across the course of Case of the Golden Idol. As usual, this video will have spoilers for Case of the Golden Idol, so don't watch it if you're planning to play that game and haven't yet. While Case of the Golden Idol is a game that doesn't feel particularly character-driven when you first play it, it gradually develops a continuity of events that makes a lot more sense if you pay attention to the characters and their motivations. Out of these characters, Edmund Cloudsley is by far the one we see the most, appearing in 8 cases out of the 12 in the base game. I don't think it's controversial to call Edmund Cloudsley the main villain of Case of the Golden Idol. You could kind of view him as the protagonist since we spend so much time in the game watching the story play out, but he's so straightforwardly evil that it doesn't make sense to look at him that way. In this video, I want to explain why I think Edmund Cloudsley is both evil and stupid. I think most people can agree that he's evil. Some people call him misguided. I don't think that's right at all. I haven't seen a lot of people point out that he's not really that smart. I think the game makes you believe that he's smart, but I'm going to try to argue why he actually isn't. Let's start by answering the question, who is Edmund Cloudsley? Edmund first appears in Case 3 of the base game as a bystander to the immolation of James Pear, a servant working for Edmund's nephew, Peter Batley. I won't go over the entire case in detail again, as Edmund isn't actually involved in the story of the idol before this point. His reaction to seeing a man burned alive isn't panic or horror, but interest in the power of the artifact used to accomplish the feat. He simply looks on, even looking through a pair of opera glasses, as if the man's agonizing death is a performance for his amusement. Or maybe he just needs them to see, but the aesthetic is still there. This moment suggests a lack of empathy on his part, and will later be mirrored in a similar scene with another character that I'll make a separate video about. We can use some of what we see in Case 3 to infer more about Edmund at this point. We learn from the newspaper that he gave a speech in front of Parliament, and we later learn that he is or aspires to be a politician. We don't know many details about his political views yet, but I believe there's some subtle foreshadowing in an unexpected piece of evidence from Case 3, which I'll go over later. Upon seeing the power of the Golden Idol, Edmund decides to take that power for himself. He does so with the help of David Gorin, a coachman introduced to him by an associate named Theo, whom we never see. After David steals the idol from Willard Wright, killing him in the process, he dutifully brings it back to Edmund. While he has been reading books about political philosophy and is likely forming his vision of an ideal world, Edmund seems content to spend the next year or two regularly experimenting with the idol while living in a sizable, well-maintained, well-staffed manor. While the Brotherhood of Masks make some attempts on his life, they all fail. Edmund seems unfazed by their threats, simply throwing them into the trash. This gives us an idea of how Edmund behaves when everything is going his way. While he does have some ambitions for the future, he doesn't pursue them with any particular urgency. He takes some precautions to keep himself safe, but continues hosting fancy dinner parties, ordering his servants about, and otherwise enjoying his life as a wealthy aristocrat. It would make intuitive sense to point to the death of his sister, Rose Cubert, in Case 5, as the event that disrupts his complacency. Indeed, this does prompt him to hide in the remote cabin where we see him in Case 6. However, he has evaded attempts on his life before, according to the narration, and over the rest of the game, he doesn't seem that strongly affected by her death. What really seems to rattle him, however, is his failure to win the affections of Mary Richards, a young woman he is interested in courting. This is a case where, despite his wealth and power, he simply cannot get something he wants. And furthermore, he cannot let it go. As we will see, this is his fatal flaw. Something interesting in Case 6 that doesn't really come up later is that Edmund was originally planning to try to use the idol to bring back the dead. Given how selfish he is, I don't think this was because he wanted to resurrect lost loved ones like Rose Cubert, so I'm guessing it was just his interpretation of what increasing lifespan would do. The scroll for Case 6 tells us that Hardy Abe and Jack Nails were killed by the trap that Edmund set, so he would have had the opportunity to experiment on their bodies. We can assume the idol did nothing to them, or at least nothing useful. Maybe it can make a corpse fresher or something, but not bring it back to life. Anyway, after case 6, Edmund manages to capture Walter Keene and convince him to switch sides. This seems to be the point where Edmund becomes singularly driven by his desire for power. He, David Gorin, and Walter Keene begin scheming to build Edmund's ideal utopia. In the epilogue, which comes next chronologically, we once again see Edmund's callousness when he uses the idol to kill a homeless, disabled veteran in order to make himself younger. This seems almost comically evil, but it does make sense when you consider that Edmund seems to only consider people valuable based on their ability to work. During the epilogue, we also get a chance to read Edmund's diary, which gives us possibly the clearest picture of his character so far. I'll go over it in more detail in a later section. Edmund begins his takeover of the Brotherhood of Masks in Case 7, when he, David Gorin, and Walter Keene infiltrate their secret meeting and manipulate a ritual of dispute between Walter and a Brotherhood member named Jeffrey Sinclair. The two of them are given 2 chalices to drink from, one of which is poison, and David signals to Walter which one is safe to drink, ensuring that Jeffrey Sinclair dies instead. Meanwhile, Edmund, now calling himself Lazarus Hearst, solves a few simple riddles and is sworn into the Brotherhood as a proud beast, the same house his father was in. Next, Edmund sets out to prove that he is the legendary Griffin Reborn, a deity worshipped by the Brotherhood which he heard about from Walter. As it turns out, any miracle that cannot be replicated is sufficient to earn this title, so Edmund plans to use the golden idol to appear to fly down from the top of a lighthouse by expelling air from it. Leading up to the date of this performance, Angus McBain, the Brotherhood member typically tasked with replicating miracles, blackmails Walter to find out how Edmund's trick will work. Walter caves and tells him about the required inputs, though he doesn't reveal that Edmund has the golden idol, which Edmund hides inside of a golden cane. As it turns out, Walter's betrayal doesn't matter. When Angus grabs the cane and tries to repeat the miracle, he falls to his death, since there is no air inside the idol to expel. Thus Edmund, or Lazarus, is crowned Griffin Reborn and gains total control over the Brotherhood. From there, Edmund begins running for Prime Minister of Albion as part of a new extremist political party called the Order Party. When it becomes clear that the other 2 parties will form a coalition against him, he tasks members of the Brotherhood with sabotaging them. At a party held at the estate of James Turner, they kill one of the party's candidates, Augustus Valentine, and frame the other, Leopold Blanchard. Because of this, Edmund is unopposed and becomes the leader of the country. After a few years pass, we get to see the horrors Edmund has wrought in Case 10. Citizens are brought in for Order Party tribunals on a weekly basis, and their behavior is judged according to Edmund's arbitrary merit system. More often than not, this results in a negative merit calculation, meaning Edmund extracts years of their lives using the golden idol. These years are then distributed amongst Order Party members, who all seem to be former Brotherhood members. In this way, Edmund and his lackeys are set to maintain their cruel rule over Albion indefinitely, unconstrained by the natural aging process. In order to secure their rule, however, they have to convince the King of Albion to recognize their legitimacy. To that end, they organize a march on his castle. However, because of one little thing that Edmund just can't let go of, this march ends up being slightly delayed, as the game puts it. The events of the final case are a convoluted mess, with Walter Keene blackmailing Edmund with his true identity, and Edmund sending David Gorin to kill him. However, Edmund's story ends before the other events of the case do, with him being the first of many people to meet a violent end that day. Having learned that Peter and Mary Batley are hiding in his father's old manor, Edmund goes to find and confront them, with a few soldiers for backup, of course. Still angry at his nephew for stealing the affections of Mary, as well as her hand in marriage, Edmund intends to ship Peter off to the colonies and kidnap Mary to become his ideal wife, as he puts it. However, thanks to his gambling addiction, Peter just happens to have won a cannon in a game of cards. When Edmund and his soldiers charge through the door, Peter panics and fires this cannon at them, killing them all instantly. Just like that, Edmund Cloudsley dies a very unceremonious death, defeated by his nephew, whom he always considered beneath him. As if that weren't enough, the cannon shot also damages the golden idol on Edmund's person, making it unusable and saving the world from its terrible power over life and death. Having lost their leader, and more importantly, their magical artifact, the Order Party is quickly disbanded, and the common people of Albion go back to drinking and being merry. The terrible evil fades away, and the true source of its power is forgotten. So, as I said in the intro, I've seen a small handful of people online defend Edmund to some extent, saying he was addressing real issues but went too far, or that he was misguided, or pointing out that he mostly followed his own virtues. However, most people seem happy to call him a villain and be done with it, so instead of arguing against the alternative, I'll focus on understanding his moral system and summarizing the specific ways in which he is evil. I suspect a major influence on Edmund's understanding of morality was his father, Sebastian Cloudsley. While we don't learn much about Sebastian from Case 2, when we see him dead at his manor, we do learn a little bit about his worldview from his Book of Aphorisms, which we see in Case 3. The book claims to offer general advice for living a good life, acting as a sort of proto-self-help book. It says that to be happy, you should simply eat a hearty meal every day and not waste time on trivialities. Of course, this advice takes for granted that a hearty meal will be available to the reader each day, with no mention of how to secure it. The section about how to be inspired is even more absurd, saying, take a walk in your forest, as if everyone reading the book is going to have their own personal forest. Not only is all of the book's advice worthless, it also reveals the privileged life which Sebastian Cloudsley enjoyed, as well as how he took that privilege for granted. This may have something to do with all of the gold and jewels that his father, Albert Cloudsley, obtained from Monkey Paw Island. To Sebastian, his life of luxury was simply a product of the natural order, and if anyone else didn't enjoy the same standards of living, it must simply be due to their own moral failings. I believe this notion of privilege is at the heart of Edmund's character. Edmund has been raised to believe he is entitled to anything he wants, and that if he doesn't get it, it must be due to some violation of the natural order. When he witnesses a demonstration of the idol's power, he isn't worried about it falling into the wrong hands or anything like that. He simply sees something he wants and decides to take it. We see this theme in his diary. The section about the Brotherhood describes them as imbeciles with power. This is pretty accurate in general, but it might be a bit unfair in the context of their ignorance about the Golden Idol's powers. Remember, we don't actually know if any Brotherhood member besides the deceased Sebastian Cloudsley or the deceased Willard Wright had laid hands on the idol yet. Sebastian seemed to have just recently discovered the increase matter heat command right before he died, so it seems like he didn't get to experiment with it for very long. In any case, while Edmund might be a better strategist than the Brotherhood by some margin, his political ideas don't make him look like less of an imbecile than them. He includes the tenets of the Order Party Manifesto in his journal. 1. All citizens are equal. This just seems like classic dystopian fiction doublespeak, where a revolution insists it will achieve equality, but after taking power, it positions its leadership above everyone else. As we'll see shortly, Edmund doesn't even believe that everyone is equal. 2. All citizens must serve society to the best of their ability. Here, we see Edmund's belief in the importance of hard work. Despite how important he considers it, though, serving society is an extremely vague goal, and Edmund doesn't care to describe what the results of this serving should be. He seems to think that toil is a virtue unto itself. 3. Citizens must be evaluated according to how virtuous they are. This is a prelude, or maybe epilude, to the Order Party tribunals, where citizens' virtues are quantified in terms of years of life to be given or taken from them. It reveals that Edmund does believe in a natural inherent hierarchy, but thinks it should be based on this nebulous concept of virtue instead of birthright. As we'll see, these two modes of hierarchical thinking aren't actually that different. 4. A society with internal contradictions is unsustainable. Therefore, it must be led by the most virtuous citizen. The king should step down. The aristocracy must be abolished. This seems like a typical fascist view of aristocracy. Edmund wants to abolish it, to replace it with the Order Party, but we'll later see that he's perfectly happy to make compromises with them as part of his rise to power. So, this monarchy that is supposedly an enemy he wants to destroy is actually more like an existing framework of power that he wants to squeeze himself into. Ironically, this means all of those internal contradictions will remain unchanged. 5. The more virtuous citizens are better able to serve society. Therefore, virtuous citizens deserve to gain more time on this earth, and bad citizens deserve to lose time. This is easily the most horrifying part of Edmund's plan. It's impressive that the game's writers came up with such a uniquely evil and cruel twist on a totalitarian regime, and it really drives home that Edmund's rise to power will lead to abject misery and suffering for the common people of Albion. Edmund plans to make everyone work extremely hard towards goals that aren't even defined as part of his political philosophy. and if they don't spend their lives working under him, he will simply take away their lives, sharing them with his inner circle. Worst of all, Edmund has the means to keep this state of affairs going for eternity. As I said in my timeline video, Edmund's political ideas are nonsense and not really relevant to any kind of coherent social vision. They reflect his understanding of how the world should work, which is as idiotic as it is cruel. Many of the rules surrounding the four virtues serve to keep Edmund in power, such as the fourth virtue prohibiting secrets. Banning things like art, literature, and excessive emotions, however, seem like instances of Edmund forbidding things that he simply has no interest in because they don't inherently relate to toil for the sake of toil or power for the sake of power. Unlike his father, Sebastian, Edmund isn't content with just having more than common people. He needs absolute power to be satisfied. It's as though he has almost enough self-awareness to realize he was born into undeserved wealth and privilege, but convinces himself that he must deserve it because of his self-assured intelligence and virtue. However, he also sees himself as more intelligent than other rich and powerful people around him, and instead of realizing that the social hierarchy is unfairly benefiting all of them, he concludes that he's meant to be even higher than them. While he still seems relatively content before Case 5, he keeps seeing more and more things he wants, and feels he's justified in taking all of them. These things include the Golden Idol, Mary Richards, leadership of the Brotherhood, and even the country of Albion. Actually, each of those things corresponds to a page in his journal, which is effectively Edmund's wish list. He even manages to get 3 of these things, the Idol, the Brotherhood, and Albion in that order. As I've explained, however, when it comes to getting Mary, he hits a bit of a snag. It's fitting that what he couldn't have was also his undoing. A lot of people have said that Edmund's pursuit of Mary in the final case displays hypocrisy, and some have suggested he is thematically defeated by his own lack of virtue. I'm inclined to disagree. Sure, if we say the 4 virtues sum up Edmund's moral core, then chasing after a married woman is a betrayal of his principles. However, I think it's perfectly in line with his only real belief, which is that he deserves to be at the top and get whatever he wants. The battle between Peter and Edmund isn't fundamentally about Edmund's hypocrisy, it's about 2 different kinds of desire. Edmund is a joyless, miserable ghoul who is driven by power and nothing else. His desire for Mary is ultimately a desire to possess her and have power over her. Peter, meanwhile, desires Mary because she makes him happy, which is just one of many reasons why him being with her represents a happy ending. Edmund's death results from his pursuit of a joyless, petty goal that he can't let go of simply because he thinks he deserves it. Far from hypocrisy, he's defeated by the same thing that has brought him so much success up to this point, his unshakable sense of entitlement. While people seem happy to agree that Edmund is evil, I haven't really seen many people point out that he's not nearly the cunning genius that the game presents him as, or that he fancies himself. Therefore, I want to highlight how his evil, nonsensical worldview leads him astray, and how his successes throughout the story are influenced by varying degrees of dumb luck. Perhaps the most extreme example is shown in the very first case, when the idol falls into the hands of Edmund's grandfather, Albert Cloudsley. The DLC cases leading up to this point make it abundantly clear that Albert had no idea what was going on, and decided to push Oberon Geller, his expedition partner, off a cliff based on superstitious fears that he had magic powers. Had Oberon remained in possession of the idol, it certainly wouldn't have gone near any of Albert's descendants. Skipping ahead several decades to Case 3, if Peter hadn't tried to take the Golden Idol, Edmund would never have known about its power, and would have spent the rest of his days pestering Mary Richards, whining to Parliament, and making his servant Brian Walker dress him in the morning. Basically, he would have lived like a child until he died of old age. The fact that he gets to witness the idol setting someone on fire, and comes to the obvious conclusion that it's a very powerful tool, doesn't prove he's intelligent. Nor does the fact that he thinks to retrieve the idol using David Gorin, a ridiculously loyal and dependable right-hand man who was apparently just handed to him by his friend Theo. Actually, when you think about it, Edmund is literally doing the exact same thing that Peter looks like an idiot for doing. He points at the shiny golden statue, turns to his servant, and says, "Go get me that. I want it." The only geniuses here are the writers for showing us the exact same move twice in a row, and making us believe that one version is stupid, while the other is genius, even though they're the exact same situation. Edmund's experiments with the idol are, admittedly, where we see him at his most intelligent. He's able to deduce that it's not some magic relic with unknowable properties, but a piece of technology that behaves in predictable ways based on the inputs it's given and the conditions it's used under. Getting gold from seawater on the open ocean seems fairly clever. It seems like this is where Edmund benefits from his natural inclination to look at everything he sees as tools for him to get what he wants. Since the golden idol has so much power and so much potential to give its user desirable things, Edmund can exercise a lot of creativity in figuring out how best it can do this for him. You might think that Edmund convincing Walter to change sides shows that he's a master manipulator, but I highly doubt any talent of Edmund's was the deciding factor. More likely, Walter recognized the power of the idol just like Edmund did, and decided that he preferred working for someone who knew how to use it effectively so that he could enjoy the fruits of its power as well. Case 7 is yet another situation that looks like Edmund executing a masterstroke of genius, but is largely just him getting lucky. While Walter may have told Edmund in advance about the ritual of dispute, it's very unlikely that Edmund had enough information to plan the strategy that we actually saw before the three of them went to the Brotherhood meeting. At best, he realized that David Gorn would be reliable enough to keep Walter alive somehow if he was present. In isolation, mugging a Brotherhood member to steal a costume is a fairly simple and cartoonish plan, and not even particularly safe considering the restrained man was likely to be discovered during the meeting or sometime shortly after, casting the results of the ritual of dispute into question. Edmund does at least manage to solve the initiation riddles on his own. This is mildly impressive if you assume that he only had the pictures to go off of, since I've seen a lot of people playing the game struggle with those on their first attempt. However, we can't rule out the possibility that Walter just told him the answers in advance. If I had to guess how Edmund came up with his trick at the lighthouse, I would say he probably looked at the list of previous attempts to claim the title of Griffin Reborn, and determined which would be the easiest to replicate using the idol. I suspect that after landing behind the lighthouse, he scrambled the inputs in case there was enough air left for Angus McBain to repeat his feat. This would explain how he later realized that Walter had betrayed him. Upon getting the idol back, he would have noticed that its inputs were the same ones he used to fly down. Once again, Edmund looks like he predicted how the situation would play out, but it could easily have led to his downfall if Angus had opened up the staff to see what was inside before he just jumped to his death. The details of Augustus Valentine's assassination almost certainly could not have been planned in advance by Edmund, since they all relied on very specific circumstances at the manor, such as where Augustus decided to go and when. As a doctor who owned a poster detailing the symptoms of various drugs, James Turner was probably the one who thought to drug Leopold, and Alistar likely had to improvise his method of killing Augustus upon catching him alone. Ironically, it's kind of hard to spot a tactical error in Edmund's attack on Peter Batley. Aside from warning Mary he was coming, of course. Realistically, there was no reason to expect Peter to have a cannon, let alone to fire it and instantly kill Edmund upon his entry. Edmund's real blunder in the situation was thinking there was any chance Mary would reciprocate his affections, but it's not clear he particularly cared about that. Ultimately, while the finer points of some of his tactical decisions were debatable, Edmund was small-minded. Even if he hadn't been thwarted by his nephew, he had no clear plan for how he was going to improve Albion through his leadership, since all he actually cared about was being in power. Ultimately, his worldview comes back to Sebastian's Book of Aphorisms. It's a set of flimsy excuses that power uses to justify itself. I haven't talked much about Peter Batley so far, but I think he's pretty important to understanding Edmund's character long before their final confrontation. Peter Batley is set up as Edmund's antithesis. While Edmund comes off as cunning and intelligent, Peter seems like a bumbling buffoon, prone to bouts of uncontrolled emotions. He's a heavy drinker and a gambler. He doesn't have the refined, aristocratic mannerisms of his family, and they all look down on him for it. Peter, however, instinctively understands something Edmund is too foolish to, that being highborn is a completely meaningless distinction, and that no one in their family is better or worse than a commoner. Well, that's kind of true. Peter does seem perfectly happy to boss around his servants, just like Edmund, so it's not like he's some kind of working-class hero. Then again, it would be boring if Peter were a traditional hero who just happened to have a better understanding of morality than Edmund, and conducted himself with humility while Edmund was egotistical. Instead, the moral differences between them feel much more raw and hard to pin down, almost on a spiritual level. Peter simply bosses around his servants because he's angry when his horses are dirty, and happy when they're clean. He doesn't value power for its own sake, but because it can give him the pleasures of life. He drinks because he likes to get drunk, gambles because he likes winning money, and courts Mary because he finds her lovely. Compare this to Edmund, who seems to have dulled emotions, and may have difficulty experiencing any pleasure at all. As a result, the only thing Edmund seems to value is power, which makes Peter's selfish, pleasure-seeking behavior seem almost virtuous by comparison. I think all this sums up why Peter is my favorite character in the Golden Idol series, and why I think he's the perfect hero to defeat Edmund. Peter is vital and alive the way that human beings are supposed to be, and the way that Edmund is not. Despite being born rich and only needing a bit of planning and restraint to be set for life, Peter doesn't plan at all and lives each day as if it's his last. He gambles until he's out of money and then begs for more with no shame. When he's lucky enough to inherit his entire family's combined fortune, he immediately goes back to gambling. This is probably the stupidest thing he could do, yet it saves his life by earning him the cannon he uses to kill Edmund, probably without even recognizing him as his uncle, or for that matter, even as the Prime Minister, if we're being realistic about Peter's intelligence. By not being a traditional hero, Peter manages to make Edmund look even more evil and pathetic. In addition to the thematic conflict I explained before, Peter winning through random chance didn't feel like a deus ex machina to me, but rather a display of Edmund's true ineptitude. It demonstrated that Edmund had been stumbling along and succeeding by random chance just as much as Peter before that point. On that equal footing, it's not so surprising that Peter was able to fight a griffin and win. So there you have it. Now you know why Edmund Cloudsley is both evil and stupid. Hopefully, this kind of analysis video is interesting to people. The games in the Golden Idol series tend not to be very character-driven, like I said, with the stories treating characters as pieces on a chessboard, who only get to influence the overarching narrative in limited ways. Instead, it's usually the Golden Idol itself that drives the story, whether by enticing greedy people or changing the world with its terrifying powers. Ultimately, the idol is the reason that Albion is subjected to the cruel whims of Edmund Cloudsley, so it's fitting that it was broken at the same time he died. Anyway, this video was a lot of fun to make, so I'll probably make more in the future. I already have one planned for a character who mirrors Edmund in a lot of ways, and I suspect it'll be a bit more controversial than this video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.